Hi everyone. So this week we're going to shift over from Excel to a tool called OpenRefine. And OpenRefine is a really valuable tool for dealing with large data sets in particular, and from generating really quick, for both dealing with them, cleaning them up, and generating kind of quick top-level insights. So while Excel is good when we kind of want to browse data and especially do some calculations on it, OpenRefine is going to give us a lot more flexibility when it comes to dealing with large data sets and also messy data sets. In fact, their tagline is a power tool for messy data. And so to look at this, right, what we're going to do is see how, so last week I sort of did a little bit of magic, and rather than trying to open our entire September City Bike data file in Excel, I did this instead with, I sort of did some magic in the background and created a 10,000 row file. This week we're going to, I'm here to show you exactly what that quote unquote magic is. And that magic is OpenRefine, which gives us a lot of control over how much of a data set we open, which is a key issue when we are dealing with large data sets, and just also provides us a lot of other really valuable tools. So I'm going to go ahead and open this. So you can see this is just the entire data set. And so OpenRefine runs actually, this is the logo here, this little blue diamond. This can be installed on any operating system. It's free. What you'll notice, I think, is that it actually works in a browser window, okay? So it's not happening on the internet, it is happening locally on your computer, but the interface is a browser window. So what this means is that we're not going to really have the keyboard shortcuts that we have in something like Excel. We're not going to be able to sort of copy paste. It's a different interaction pattern, but I think hopefully you'll see quickly how powerful it can be. So this is the, it defaults to kind of open project. I don't have any existing projects here. So I go to create project, and this is going to let me choose data that I want to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and choose this file that I just downloaded. And you notice that I can choose the entire file, even though that file is quite large. In fact, if I look at it, let's see. If I were to look at this, I see that this is, 330 megabytes roughly. Okay, so it's a pretty big file, something again that would probably crash Excel. So, but I can choose my file, and even though it says, again, even though it says uploading data, it's not actually uploading it to a remote location. It's just, that's the language that it uses. It's created what we call a local web server here. So it's, just sort of strange terminology. But in any case, one of the important things is you can see that it makes a guess about what kind of data this is. It is indeed CSV data, and we can see that it's giving us this nice preview of what the data looks like given the existing settings. Now, I'm going to call this City Bike first, let's call it first 100. Okay, so first I want to make sure that I give it a unique file name, okay, because I don't necessarily want, this will allow me to create multiple projects that have the same name, which can get very, very confusing. So I want to make sure that I have created a unique file name. But the real key here is that rather than just opening the entire data set, I can actually check this little box and say load at most. And in this case, I can be pretty substantial with this. I'm going to load 100,000 rows of data. You notice also too that by default it assumes that there is a column header line, which of course there is. This is also nice because it means that row count on the left isn't offset by 1, which was our experience in Excel, where it really didn't have a way to deal with the idea of a header row that wasn't part of the data set. So 100,000 rows is going to be fine for this volume of data. Might take a second on your depending on the machine that you're using. And I say create project, and it's going to give me this message, but then it's going to open it up anyway. And so you'll notice, I think, right away, a few things about this. So first of all, what I like about this is that it automatically shows me that I have 100,000 rows. Now, considering that I told it that I wanted to open 100,000 rows, that might not seem very interesting. As we start manipulating and looking at this data in different ways, it is going to become more useful. But even if you think about a lot of times when you download data sets, the only way you have to tell how many rows it has. I mean, you can look at the file size to see about how big the file is, but the only way to know how many actual rows it is in Excel is to open it up and scroll to the bottom, which is pretty frustrating, right? I mean, it's a sort of a stupid task to have to do. So the nice thing is that OpenRefine always gives us this count right at the top. You'll notice, however, that it'll only show me up to 50 rows at a time at the maximum, right? And its default is actually much fewer than that. I can browse through it using these first, next, and last, but as you might imagine, especially if I have 100,000 rows, even 50 rows at a time, I'm not going to be able to browse this data in that way. And that's just fine, because the mechanisms that OpenRefine lets us use for examining data are much more robust than just us having to scan through, scroll through and look at things. So the first and probably the key, the sort of key function for OpenRefine is something called a facet. And you can think of this a little bit like a filter for unique values, okay? So I'm going to do this example on the start station ID. And so in order to interact with a column of data, I have to select I click on this little arrow that's pointing down. You can see the first option is facet. Now here I'm going to choose text facet, and that's because right now all of the data in my columns is text. OpenRefine doesn't do a lot of automatic transformation of, it doesn't guess what data type is in a particular field. That's actually an advantage in my opinion. Sometimes when I open things in Excel, it makes changes to like the date format, for example, that I find really frustrating. So I could just go ahead and right away on this, I can do a text facet. And you'll see that this window comes up on the left. This offers us a lot of really valuable information with very little effort, as I'm sure you can see. Now, right now, this is sorted by name. I don't really want that. I'm going to sort it by count instead. But we already have quite a lot of metadata about this, right? In this first 100,000 rows, we now know that there are 608 different unique start station IDs are present. We don't know if that's all of the start stations in the city bike system, but we know that's the number in this data set. When I do that sort by count, I get a descending list of how frequently every one of these values appears. So I know exactly how many rows have start station ID number 519 in them. If I wanted to examine this more closely, I can actually go ahead and select that choices link, and it's going to actually give me this as a tab delimited file with those values. So if I wanted to do some kind of analysis just on the distribution of or the number of times that different start stations appear, I could do that right off the bat. The other thing that this lets us do is very easily start to kind of dig into our data by creating facets and then selecting subsets of those facets. So for example, if I just wanted to examine all of the values, all of the rows where the start station ID is 519, I can just select that. We now see, as we expect, that there's 752 matching rows. If I wanted to look at the top 3, right, I could go here and I can actually just choose include on this side, right? And you can see by the orange highlight which ones I have included. Again, it's giving me a count of the matching rows, which is really handy. And so this gives me a really nice way to just very quickly get a top line understanding of what's in my data set. Now, there are more types of text facet than there's more types of facets than just text facets. In order to make use of them, we need to actually tell OpenRefine what type of data, how it should be treating the data in our columns. We need to be a little bit more specific. So in this case, trip duration we know is in seconds, right? I want it to treat that as a number because it is. Start station ID obviously is also a number technically. It's a set of digits, but it's really more of an identifier. It's really more like a name. So in order to convert this to numbers, I'm going to again select the downward facing triangle on that column. And I'm going to say, I actually say edit cells. So even though I'm performing this transform on an entire column, it's considered a cell level transform. And if I just come to common transforms here, I can say to number. And it's going to go ahead and do all that. Now, one thing you want to be careful of here is that OpenRefine is what in programming we might call, I think of as stateful, okay? Which is to say that I've just performed this transform, and you can tell that something has happened because now these trip durations are showing up in green. However, OpenRefine is very respectful of the subsets that we have selected, which means that, for example, if I were to export this data right now as a CSV, right, it would actually only be saving out the 2,120 matching rows that are currently selected. This is actually really handy because I find that often getting subsets of an Excel spreadsheet out of Excel in a useful way is pretty difficult or just tedious. In this case, it's very straightforward, right? So if I just want to be working with a subset of the data, I can quickly select that subset, export it as a CSV file, open it as another OpenRefine project, and work with my subset quite directly. What that also means, however, is that because in this case, I had these specific start stations selected, as you will see as I start to remove this, oops. Okay, what you see is that now that it's just sort of a regular sorted order again, and I don't have those subselections, the green highlight has disappeared from trip duration. Now this doesn't mean that for the ones that I chose, it wasn't converted to a number. It certainly was, but because I applied that transform when only certain cells were selected, it was only applied to those selected cells. So the short advice here is that anything that you want to, before you apply any transform that you want to be sure applies to an entire column of your entire data set, make sure that you don't have anything sub-selected in the left-hand pane. So no harm is done by this. It's just maybe not what you would expect given how other programs operate. So it's very easy for me to come back to edit cells when I have nothing selected, convert them to number. And now we see this, no matter what I have selected, is going to be a number. I'm also going to do another transform where I convert the start time and stop time to dates. Whoops, or I try to do that. Yep. And the reason why I'm doing this is because it's going to allow me to do different kinds of facets. Specifically, and perhaps unsurprisingly, it's going to allow me to do a numeric facet on the number entries, and it's going to allow me to do a so-called timeline facet on these on the date data types. Now, some interesting things here to notice. First of all, what we can see here, we talked a little bit about standard distributions and skewed distributions. This is clearly a very skewed distribution. The vast majority of our trip duration values are between 1 and 100,000 seconds. We have a few that are crazy outliers out here, right? You can barely see the highlight, but I can go ahead and I can narrow in on those by just adjusting these window ranges. And if you notice down here, it's pretty hard to see, but there's a very tiny little blue bar. So the thing to know is that on timeline facets, it always shows you a picture of the entire data set, and then it highlights your subselection, the subselection in your data set with a slightly darker blue. This means that often it's very difficult with a timeline facet where you have, where you're trying to look at the pattern in a relatively small number of rows. You probably want to actually export that data and then do a timeline facet on just the subset that you're interested in if you want to look at that pattern. It's going to be very hard to perceive against the larger patterns backdrop here. But so everything is being reflected here. I found one matching row. This is a ride that apparently lasted from September 2nd until September 28th. Somebody failed to return their city bike that entire time. Might be something else going on here. It actually says that the end station name is the New York City Pike Depot, I think, in Gowanus. So that'd be interesting to know what that's about. But again, it's just to say that this gives me a lot of ways to examine my data and sort of see what is, get a feel for what's happening. So I could start to make some claims and understandings about what patterns exist. We can see that there's a pattern in the way that bikes are taken out. Also, I can do things like facet on, say, gender, right, which I can treat as a text facet if I want. Understand within a subset how many people are men, women, or didn't identify, how many people are subscribers and customers. So hopefully you can see how this helps, lets us start generating some insights about our data. When we come back, we're going to look at some other features of OpenRefine that will let us even do further analysis.